Today, I'm basically going to be giving a brief sort of snapshot of Muhammad Iqbal's panentheism and his conception of the relationship between science and religion, and sort of, the relationship between this presentation and the paper that I wrote is that in the paper that I wrote, I basically try and articulate a sort of position using Muhammad Iqbal and a philosopher called Adrian Moore to make a move that's analogous to a defense that sort of a religious believer might make regarding the problem of evil in response to the new atheists who assert that there's only one form of sense making, scientific sense making. But rather than sort of tracing the intricacies of my argument, I'm just going to basically focus on three main points today about Iqbal's conception between Iqbal's conception of the relationship between science and religion. And the 3 points I'm going to highlight is first, that religion is inclusive of science. Second, religion in its holistic outlook is distinctive from science, which focuses on discrete analyzable entities. And then finally, religion is dynamic with science. But before I get onto that, I should probably sort of introduce you all to who Muhammad Iqbal is. So a brief biography. He was born and raised in Punjab on the Indian subcontinent in 1877 before the partition. And he went to study philosophy at Cambridge under the likes of McTaggart and James Ward, before then doing his PhD on the developments of metaphysics at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. He's perhaps most famous for being the chief political ideologue of Pakistan, and in the East, in sort of like the Muslim world, I guess, he's very sort of famous for his poetry in Urdu, Arabic, and Farsi. And sort of one of my personal favorite bits of poetry from him, which I would strongly recommend everyone to sort of check out, is a description of an encounter that he has between himself, Rumi, and Nietzsche in his sort of description of his ascension into the heavens in the Book of Eternity. But this aside, my focus here is going to be on Iqbal's magnum opus in English, which is The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, a work that brought Islam into contact with modernity in a way that had never been done before and is still yet to be done in quite as majestic a manner as Iqbal did. And yeah, I guess part of the aim of the presentation today is to show how Iqbal's almost century-old philosophy of religion that's flown under the radar is still as prescient today as it was when he wrote. And sort of a quote that I have from Iqbal about sort of his own prescience is, I have no need for the ear of today, I'm the voice of the poet of tomorrow. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to Iqbal's panentheism. Whilst he never explicitly called his view panentheistic, commentators since Roger Whitmore's review of the Reconstruction have typically reviewed to his view as panentheistic. Panentheism is obviously the view that God encompasses the world, yet the world is not God. His panentheism is ultimately grounded in his Bergsonian view of time, although to even say this risks mischaracterizing Iqbal as somehow as a mere spin-off of Bergson. He was deeply influenced by a range of thinkers from the Western tradition, for instance, Kant and Nietzsche, and the Islamic tradition too, with the most cited source being the Quran itself. But yeah, I'm not going to sort of delve into the intricacies of his Bergsonian metaphysics of time and how he sort of develops his panentheism out of that, because I think it'll take far too long to do. But yeah, the point that I want to just sort of elaborate on here is that his view is panentheistic. So what does his panentheism mean for his view of the relationship between science and religion? Well, I mean, if you're a panentheist, one claim that you kind of have to accept is that all of reality is in some sense religious, right? And sort of what follows from this for Iqbal is that scientific sense making itself is religious. And a quote that I have from Iqbal here is, "Thus a view that we have taken gives a fresh meaning to physical science. The knowledge of nature is knowledge of God's behavior. In our observation of nature, we are virtually seeking a kind of intimacy with the absolute ego, and this is only another form of worship." So I guess that sort of covers the first point I wanted to discuss here, this idea that religion is inclusive of science. For Iqbal, religion and science are not sort of like two domains that have no overlap with one another. They're very much related to one another, which is in stark contrast to, say, what the new atheists might sort of view. The new atheist view about religion and science might be, right? They might sort of view these two domains as being quite separate from one another. Yet, in spite of this, it's important to emphasize that for Iqbal, religion is distinctive from science. And the main reason for this is that science itself is inherently a sectional view of reality. For example, physics deals with physical matter, biology deals with living organisms. But when we try to sort of figure out how do we get from the discrete analyzable entities of physics to the living matter of biology, we encounter real difficulties. And so another quote that I have from Iqbal here is, "Nature as a subject of science is a highly artificial affair, and this artificiality is the result of that selective process to which science must subject her in the interests of precision." And this sort of sectional view of reality stands in stark contrast to religious sense making, which makes sense of the whole of reality, not restricting itself to one perspective or set of data. It includes, for instance, what we might sort of collectively understand as being religious experiences. So, I mean, throughout the Reconstruction, I mean, one of the other people that he draws on quite a lot is William James's account of religious experiences as well. So yeah, but I mean, I guess one objection that might be levied against Iqbal here is, if we're saying religious sense making makes sense of, all kinds of experiences, not just sort of empirical experiences that we might have, does it even make sense to call it a form of sense making? Because it stands in stark contrast to the communicable and public sense making of science, right? And Iqbal himself is quite explicit about religious sense making being very individual and incommunicable. But I think what's important for Iqbal is that although religious sense making does not yield the sort of precision that scientific sense making does in abstract principles of nature, religious sense making yields a more important kind of precision, which is the becoming of each individual, right? And this relates back to his Bergsonian metaphysics of time. But religious sense making, it involves making sense of our place in the world, right? It's not just sort of like trying to make sense of the world itself, but rather, who we are as people in the world and what type of people we want to become. And so if we're doing that, if we're making sense of what type of people we want to become, then we have to sort of synthesize all of these different types of experiences that present themselves to humans. Thus, for Iqbal, whilst Iqbal's conception of religious sense making might be alien to a scientific sense maker as a way of actually making sense of things, for Iqbal, it's worth noting that for Iqbal, it doesn't actually count as a mark against his conception of religious sense making. Okay, so the final point that I want to cover before I sort of close with some quotes from Charles Taylor about Iqbal is, yeah, this idea of religion being dynamic with science. Yeah, I think it's very important for Iqbal's conception of Islam that his conception isn't one that is static. And I mean, again, this is related to the underlying sort of metaphysics of time, but for Iqbal and like for Bergson, his view of time is one that emphasizes the absolute novelty and newness that reality presents itself to us at each moment. And this sort of newness or absolute novelty of time and reality means that for Iqbal, it's very well possible that we might discover a scientific fact that is, in tension with a previous religious claim, for example, in the Quran or some other religious text. And for Iqbal, if this is the case, if we do discover, something about the nature of the universe that stands in contrast to what's said in a religious text, it's the responsibility of the religious believer not to shun away from science, but to rather reinterpret the religious claim in light of this new scientific fact. And yeah, I have a quote here from the preface of the Reconstruction, which I think helps to illustrate this point about Iqbal's dynamic conception of religion and science. So he says, and I quote, "As knowledge advances and fresh avenues of thought are opened, other views, and probably sounder views than those set forth in the Reconstruction, are possible. Our duty is to carefully watch the progress of human thought and to maintain an independent, critical attitude towards it." So, yeah, I mean, I guess to me, what that quote sort of illustrates is sort of this dynamism of this dynamic relationship between religion and science. And I think one thing that's sort of a credit to Iqbal is that he's, unlike most philosophers, he's very open to the fact that, what he's saying isn't necessarily the end all and be all of all there is to say about the nature of reality. Someone else might come onto the scene later down the line and have a better view than him. So yeah, I mean, if you could just maybe go to the next slide for me, thank you. So yeah, I mean, I hope this very brief snapshot has shown Iqbal's sort of relevance to discussions that might be had surrounding religion and science. However, I want to very briefly sort of use some quotes from Charles Taylor to illustrate Iqbal's broader contemporary relevance, not just to the realms of science and religion. So here are some quotes from Charles Taylor. "We must reread Iqbal. For a time, we could imagine him forgotten, consigned to the oubliettes with other figures of Islamic modernism from the beginning of this century. But he had to come back. We all need to hear him again. Citizens of the West, Muslims, and those from his native India, where a form of Hindu chauvinism rages in our times that exceeds his worst fears." Yeah, that's, I guess, everything I had to say in this very brief summary of Iqbal. But I guess one thing that I should emphasize is that, like any great philosopher, it's very difficult to fully encapsulate the sort of complete totality of his thought in a short discussion like this. But I hope I've at least given some impetus to either read my paper or to read the Reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Shariq. I think a round of applause. That was really masterfully done. We know it is a really tough challenge to try and present these papers in such a short period of time. We have 5 minutes for questions. So does anybody have any questions for Shariq? Let's get the chat. John, you're on mute.
Can I ask, were you saying that Iqbal believed that the practice of science was worship? Did I get it right or not?
Sorry, could you just repeat that last part again?
Were you saying that did Iqbal believe that the practice of science was a form of worship?
Yes. So yeah, that was one of the quotes that I have from him. So for Iqbal,
that's interesting.
because all of reality is in some sense religious, right? If we're scientists and we say that the world isn't the behavior of God or something, then as scientists we're examining God's behavior, which is itself a form of worship. And this sort of line of thought itself is actually very much tied up with like the Quranic tradition, which says that knowledge itself is sort of like attaining knowledge itself is a form of worship as well.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, John. Great question. Other John, have you come on camera to ask a question? You're on. There we go.
I'm on mute now. Yes, I found that fascinating for a particular reason, actually, which might be worth making explicit in this context. I haven't studied Iqbal's writings in any depth, but I first encountered him in the very late 1990s, early 2000s. This was at a time when the International Society for Science and Religion was established, and Muhammad Iqbal was very much part of that initial community. But what I am really remembering, and this is absolutely vividly etched in my mind, was that he was very unhappy in that initial circle, because he felt that when science and religion was being discussed, and this is by figures like John Polkinghorne, and I guess it would have been true of Arthur Peacocke as well, the emphasis was just so focused on Protestant science and religion in the West. And Muhammad was very, very angry about that, I think it has to be said. And there were some very difficult sessions in those very early days where he kept saying, and it was very touching, he said, "What are we to say to my people that your science and religion is this?" So I have always had a kind of deep sense of respect, but one also in which the end successfully, I think, to bring about a change of perspective that really was more global and took more seriously the enormous contributions that Islamic scholars have made to scientific progress. So I'm sorry, that isn't really a question, but I felt that was an insight from the past that might help to understand some of the dialectic going on here.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I actually didn't know that sort of Iqbal had been discussed previously. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, sort of what years were this sort of conference? When was it originally? When did it originally come about?
I'm pretty sure that it was 2002. There was an inaugural conference funded by the Don Templeton Foundation, held at in Granada in Spain, which of course was a wonderful center to hold a conference of that kind. The idea was, it's one that the Templeton Foundation had been really quite keen on, to set up a proper, if you like, academy for the study of science and religion, where members of that academy would not just be any amateur who was interested in the subject, but people who had made some significant contribution to the discussion of science and religion, maybe through a publication, maybe through highly significant and administrative work. And the conference that I'm thinking of was actually the one in Granada, where John Polkinghorne, who was the first chair, first director, or president perhaps, I've forgotten the technical term, John Polkinghorne was trying to launch the whole thing, and very much wanted it to be a sense of community. But it was quite difficult to establish that, because I think Iqbal was almost alone, not completely alone, but almost alone in representing other cultures. And therefore, there were quite difficult features of the kind of holding the conference together. And that was the first of several outbursts from Iqbal that I did witness round about that time. I noticed.
I'm really sorry, John. I'm going to have to interrupt so we can move on to the next one. But I think raises such an important point, and I think one that goes on today, that we do need to make sure our conversation doesn't become just Protestant theology or just Catholic or any particular ecumenical theology, and that it is broader and it is global. So thank you, John. I'm sure you and Shariq can follow up after this as well, because I think there's probably further conversations to be had, or it might be we've got time at the end. So thank you very much, John, and thank you, Shariq, for a really good presentation.
Yes, hello to everyone. As you can see, the title of today's talk is God's Neurodiverse Creation, Remarks on the Imago Dei. This paper will examine the nexus of theology and neurodiversity studies, elucidating how these perspectives challenge traditional conceptions of human nature. It is proposed that the neurodiversity paradigm, which is grounded in the acknowledgement of diverse neural functioning, provides a transformative lens through which societal norms and perceptions can be rethought. The following is a brief outline of my talk. The initial section of the presentation will introduce the neurodiversity paradigm and clarify the terminology used in this context. Secondly, the challenges that the concept of neurodiversity poses for theological anthropology will be explored with reference to the work of Protestant theologian Dirk Evers. Thirdly, Evers' proposal for relational anthropology will be discussed with reference to the work of Episcopal theologian Joanna Ledenhag. Finally, a brief summary and outlook for future research will be presented. So let's make a start. Neurodiversity refers to the diversity of body minds rather than merely the variation among brains. This emphasizes that a person's neurocognitive functioning, socio-cultural environment, and embodied experience of the world are all interrelated. These factors can result in alterations to the brain that impact neurocognitive functioning, leading to the emergence of new embodied experiences, or as Nick Walker puts it, we are not minds riding around in vehicles of flesh and bone. We are body minds, bodies that think and perceive. According to Judy Singer, who coined the term neurodiversity, I quote her, "The neurologically different represents a new addition to the familiar political categories of class, gender, race, and will augment the insights of the social model of disability." In opposition to the medical model of disability, the social model of disability posits that impairment rather than disability is a consequence of societal rules. At this time, there's a paradigm shift occurring between the neurodiversity paradigm, which is rooted in a social model of disability, and the pathology paradigm, which refers to a medical model of disability. In contrast to the pathology paradigm, the neurodiversity paradigm posits that neurodiversity is a natural, healthy, and valuable form of human diversity. There is no normal or right style of human mind any more than there is one normal or right ethnicity, gender, or culture. Moreover, Walker puts forth a distinction between neurotypical and neurodivergent populations. Those who are neurotypical are able and willing to conform to the standards of the dominant neuronormative culture, thereby being considered normal body minds and consequently receiving neurotypical privilege. The term neurodivergence is an umbrella term that encompasses various neurodivergent populations, including ADHD, autists, or dyslexics, which are also referred to as neurominority. In light of these considerations, the neurodiversity paradigm also acknowledges that dynamics of social inequality, privilege, and oppression, as well as the dynamics by which diversity, when embraced, acts as a source of creative potential within a group or society, have evolved in relation to perceptions of neurodivergence from the dominant culture. This is analogous to the evolution of other forms of human diversity. We now turn to our second point and to the examination of the theological reception of the concept of neurodiversity. As posited by Dirk Evers, the neurodiversity movement prompts significant inquiries into the concept of human normality and the interrelationship between biology, the brain, and personal identity within the theological domain. He posits that being human entails transcending and transforming nature through embodied self-expression and the creation of a world shaped by language, culture, and theology. Accordingly, the concept of naturality is regarded as a cultural construct that, when adopted by a group of individuals, gives rise to the formation of norms, thereby establishing the labels normal and abnormal. Consequently, the notion of objective human behavior or nature is untenable. In light of this, Evers recognizes the neurodiversity movement as a valuable contribution to our understanding of human nature because it helps to, I quote, liberate theological anthropology to understand human beings in all the diversity as the image, including their neurodiversity as the image of God. He asserts that the objective of theological anthropology is to investigate the essence of humanity, to elucidate the intricate nature of human existence, and to provide guidance for life of faith. If it is assumed that all human beings participate in the image of God, then the fact of diversity might suggest that the Creator cannot be represented by a single individual, but rather by all human beings in their diversity and interrelatedness. Consequently, the imago Dei, I quote, rather refers to formal and relational features of human existence than to certain specific properties. While human diversity reflects the inner Trinitarian self-differentiation of God, there is also unity in God made possible by the inner Trinitarian relationship between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Therefore, as bearers of God's image, humans are called to live in unity while respecting differences and diversity. However, this will only be realized in the kingdom of God in the eschaton, according to Evers. According to Evers, the defining attribute of human condition is its capacity for reflexivity, which enables the formation of relationships of varying degrees of intimacy, including I-it, I-thou, and I-God. Such a view is a product of the shift in theological anthropology from rationality to relationality that has taken place over the past century. The relational term places particular emphasis on a specific qualitative form of relationality as the foundation for human dignity and moral status. However, Evers' association of the imago Dei with human relational capacity may be problematic, particularly in the light of the pathologizing views on neurodiversity. For instance, the use of the term autism by Kevin van Hooser as a theological metaphor for sinful autonomy and Andrew Pinson's concept of spiritual autism are cause for concern. This brings us to our third section about autism and relational anthropology. Joanna Ledenhag's critique of the metaphorical use of autism is based on an analysis of the historical and systematic connection between the genesis of relational anthropology and a medical understanding of autism. She asserts that, for instance, Karl Barth and Emil Brunner espoused the I-thou philosophy, stating that, I quote, "The imago Dei concerns the relational being of humanity, and it is only in relationship to God that human beings can claim the unique status as persons." In a similar vein, Leo Kanner, a pioneering figure in the field of autism research, posited that, I quote Kanner, "Children's inability to relate themselves in the ordinary way to people and situations from the beginning of life can be described as extreme autistic aloneness." Ledenhag asserts that Kanner's characterization of autistic behavior as a tendency to prefer I-it relationship with objects over I-thou relationship with people illustrates the intertwined history between the early pathological concept of autism and the relational accounts of theological anthropology. This in turn gives rise to the aforementioned metaphorical use of autism, which implies the exclusion of autists from the imago Dei. It is against this background that Ledenhag's model of a science-engaged theology of autism is to be understood. This model is rooted in disability theology and offers a critique of the concept of mere inclusivity, which is limited to considerations of accessibility and perpetuates the status quo of an able host and a disabled guest. In light of this, Ledenhag posits that disability can be understood as a prophetic force within society, prompting, I quote, "a crisis, judgment, upon the ableist assumptions of liberal society and even some eschatological hopes of the Christian Church." End of quote. Consequently, the integration of disabled persons into the community through accessibility and a change in the attitudes of able-bodied persons is essential. It is important to note that when Ledenhag writes about disability, she operates within the framework of a social model of disability, which assumes that disability is a consequence of societal barriers rather than individual impairments. Nevertheless, Ledenhag persists in employing medical terminology that is repudiated by some proponents of the neurodiversity movement and continues to designate autism as a disorder rather than an impairment. This is to highlight the theological implications of the very concept of disorder, namely that we employ the term psychological disorder because we presuppose a divinely created order. Ledenhag posits that the divine order will only be actualized in the resurrection, thereby suggesting that the discourse on disability, insofar as it adheres to the language of a medical model of disability, becomes an eschatological reflection. Given this, she proposes a prophetic medical model as the framework for science-engaged theology of autism. This approach entails, I quote again, engaging with contemporary medicine and employing various disorders or impairments like autism as prophetic revelations of the divine order, end of quote. Consequently, theorizing about disorder or disability serves as a means to a deeper understanding of the ideal human being and the underlying divine order that will only be fully revealed in the eschaton. So let's wrap up. In their theological discussion, Evers and Ledenhag primarily address the neurodiversity discourse in the context of the doctrine of creation and eschatology. Both theologians refer to the Imago Dei, in which humanity participates in its diversity, and declare this variation among human beings as an important aspect of what it means to be created in the image of God. This perspective challenges the traditional essentialist view of human nature, as does the neurodiversity paradigm. Evers, with the idea of the kingdom of God, in which all people live in peace, describes unity despite differences as the goal of human nature. Ledenhag ascribes a prophetic role to disabled persons, challenging the social order and pointing to the divine order inherent in creation and to be expected in the resurrection. It is also noteworthy that Naomi Lawson-Jacobs has observed that theological engagement with the neurodiversity discourse is largely rooted in the pathology paradigm on the one hand, and on the other hand, that it speaks for or about neurodivergent people, but not with them. Against the background of Evers and Ledenhag's assertion that neurodivergent individuals are an integral part of God's neurodiverse creation, there is a pressing need for theological engagement with the lived experiences of neurodivergent Christians, rather than merely theorizing about them. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emil. Brilliantly done. And again, perfectly on time. So well done. So I suppose my question would be, in case anyone's typing, what do you think is the biggest challenge in developing an inclusive theology? Because is it just simply we need to actually have a conversation with rather than write about?
That's an excellent question, because that's right at the center of what I'm currently struggling with my approach to a theology of neurodiversity. Because as it is now, I think of like on a cultural theoretical level, which tries to see forms of disability, especially neurodivergence, as a form of identity and more than just mere biological matter. But there are some difficulties when I dissolve like the whole concept of neurodiversity and neurodivergence and so on into identity philosophy, because then we have issues with legal aspects or healthcare systems, because identifying myself as neurodivergent or neurotypical does not give a governmental reason to support a family which needs therapy, medical support, and so on. And so that's something I want to explore in a later project, because currently I'm working on my dissertation in another field. But for my postdoc, I want to focus on this topic, and then I want to explore what difficulties appear if you dilute the concept of neurodiversity or autism into a concept of cultural theory and philosophy of identity. So there are some struggles, especially referring legal action and so on. So I think this is very important to discuss. And I really like the work of Joanna. She's also speaking today. And we talked in September about this, that when I dissolve my idea for theology of neurodiversity too much, then we like lose a grasp of what autism is, and we lose the ability to support if medical care is needed. So this is something I have to think about, and that's why I think her work on science-engaged theology is very interesting in this regards. So I hope this answered your question.
It did, thank you. Has anyone else got any questions at this point? I suppose my question is, which I thought was really interesting, I don't know if this is answerable in a minute, but the idea of, obviously the idea of disability being a social issue, so it's actually the person isn't disabled, it's the society that is disabling them, has gained a lot of ground recently. Do you think that becomes problematic when you engage with questions of sort of theological questions of eschatology and being made anew? Do you think there's a challenge there in terms of that they are not appropriately in the Imago Dei as they stand, but will be made in the Imago Dei in the afterlife?
So I think in regards to what we in our daily life call psychological disorders, which are part of our identity in some regard, I think what would change in the eschaton is like the suffering, because that's according to the ICD, the German catalog for psychological diseases. A lot of the argument is this is a disease because it creates suffering. For example, ADHD was a long time thought as a children's disease, but now newer studies state that this does not go away, but people learn to cope, to find mechanisms to survive in daily life. But this does not exclude suffering, because you have to mask all the time. Same with autism, to different degrees, because it's a lot of a spectrum and not just a general concept. So I think to create an image in heaven, there would be neurodiversity, but without the suffering, like being fully accepted as people are and not feel weird or have to restrict themselves to stick to certain rules. So I think this goes hand in hand with my idea of impairment and disability. Like also the idea is to create some heaven on earth when we try to break down societal barriers for impaired persons. So yeah.
Thank you ever so much, Emil. Just going to give Emil a round of applause because I think that was really brilliantly done. So virtual round of applause for Emil. It's never quite the same, but yeah, the sentiment is there. So thank you very much, Emil.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. My paper title is Digital Transformation to Improve the Church in Doing its Mission, Koinonia, Diakonia, and Marturia. I will introduce myself. I'm currently pursuing a bachelor degree in theology in Indonesia, Cipanas Theological Seminary, in 5 semester. I will fetch what has Athens to do with the Jerusalem Tertullian said. emphasizes the separation between Christian teaching and human philosophy. His famous line, "What has Athens to do with Jerusalem?" saw the incompatibility between Greek philosophy and the Christian faith. The separation is reflected in Christian history, such between church and state, science and religion. In the digital age, we can ask, what does the digital work have to do with Christian faith? Digital theology ensures that that digital work can strengthen faith and support the mission of the church without replacing the essence of faith itself. Digital theology serves as a guide to manage the change need for the church to utilize the digital technology that God has given us. So, how can digital theology do this? Yeah. In the reflect and involving the digital era, the church as a community of faith an organization faced the challenge of formulating its response to rapid technological advance. In this context, it is important for the church to relate technology to strengthen the mission of the church. Thus, the concept of digital theology is a response to change and offer a framework for utilizing digital tools to enhance aspect of the church mission, Koinonia, Diakonia, and Marturia. However, even with a proper theological framework that recognizes the need to integrate digital technology into the church mission, the effort to apply it does not come with a challenge. Some studies mention that church must be able to manage and touch service using digital transformation. Digital transformation management has been widely identified in various studies, especially in company, organization, governance, health, and education. But in the church context, the concept and method digital transformation management has not received much attention. Some studies only saw the connection between digital transformation and the church. Digital theology in church mission. In the advance of the digital era, the church faced rapid change in digital technology. The change challenged the church to respond in both its theology as well as in its organization or community transformation practice. The underlying cause to create such theology is the constant transformation in digital world that has been changing the members of society, including the church members. At practical level of doing its mission, the church cannot overlook the presence of digital theology. Digital theology is church's response in the practical realm and the realm of theological talk, spirituality, and mission. Campbell states that Campbell as digital theological states that theology must dialogue with technological practice and digital culture. God mission must continue to deliver the gospel in the digital act by embracing and developing digital technology that acts as a stewardship in carrying out the mission of the church. The concept of digital transformation is a concept that organizes in area of company, business, and organization. From a technological perspective, digital transformation can be understood as third step in a evolutionary process consisting of three steps. The first step is digitalization. The second step is digitalization, and the final step is transformation, which reflect creative evolution within the organization. Digital transformation in church mission. Oregon and Pillai point out that the ongoing development of digital transformation in our world is not only in for-profit organization or business and government, but also in church ministry as non-profit organization. When digital transformation is done effectively and efficiently, church can unlock new capabilities and experience. Digital transformation often opportunity to enhance the church's capacity in reach, enhance, and serve others. Embracing digital transformation allow the church to contain its relevant, effective, efficient, and faithful ministry based on its core mission. Digital transformation management and heads and church mission, Koinonia, Diakonia, and Marturia. Management is understood as the function of an organizational system that ensures the achievement to establish goal and objective efficiency and effectively. George Haidery explained management is a clear process consisting of planning, organizing, implementing, and controlling to achieve goal by utilizing results. Peter Drucker defines management as a multifunctional organ that manages business, managers, workers, and jobs to achieve its mission. Management is a system process of managing resources to achieve management goals, which involve planning, organizing, implementing, and controlling. Domain in digital transformation. First is choose members. The expectation and before of congregations that are influenced by technology indicate that the importance of church to understand the spiritual, psychological, social, and physical needs of the church member in digital era. Number two is competence. Church growth. The fast-changing competitive landscape requires church to innovate the way they grow. Church must take new steps in growth program, leveraging technology to building strong and relevant community. Number three is data or church information. Data collection and analysis allow church to better understand congregational demographic, their needs, and engagement patterns. With this insight, church can make better strategic decisions, such as designing more effectively and efficient program. Number four is innovation or renewable products and service. Digital transformation is driving church to develop new products and services, such as apps for donation, platform for spiritual training, and more interactive methods of delivering the word. This innovation not only increases congregation engagement, but also enriches the spiritual experience. Number five, value or legacy of the church. Something is considered as valuable if it fulfills the needs of the church members. The understanding of how to create and deliver something of value to congregation, the church must evolve along with technological change. Application and focus of transformation. Number one is vision, goal, and strategy. Digital transformation strategy. According to Campbell, transverse is platform and knowledge. Translate is understanding interactive like Zoom. Transform is digital storytelling or multi-platform. Implementation in church mission, Koinonia, Translate, interaction space, Zoom for fellowship and relationship building. Diakonia is transform, digital storytelling to share ministry impact. Marturia, transfer, spreading biblical teaching through knowledge platform. Second is leadership in digital transformation. Leadership in digital transformation key to manage the church mission in digital age. Successful leaders will readiness for change, provide direction, maintaining motivation, and manage transformation effectively. Integration of leadership model. I have two is transformation leadership, inspire congressional to share with faith through broader digital platform. Servant leadership is promise collaboration, fostering better interaction via virtual meeting and online discussion. Impact on the church mission is Koinonia strengths fellowship through virtual platform. Diakonia facilitates service and community outreach. Marturia enhances the church witness through digital engagement. Outcome improve efficiently and strengthen the church commitment to serving and empowering the community. Number three is communication. The role communication in digital transformation. Communication is key in managing and supporting the church mission in the digital era. Technological innovation in communication, ICT, AIC, and big data create a new possibility in the communication process. Impact of ICT and digital transformation on digital church mission, expand faith outreach, strength fellowship, and enhance social ministry effectively. Number four is digital culture and mindset. Digital transformation involves creating a digital culture, a set of value and behavior that derive new ways of thinking, working, and interaction. Organizational culture. Organizational culture connects people, work, team, and goals, and is essential in facilitating the transformation process. Digital culture in the church. Digital culture in the church encourages new way of thinking and interaction, supported by digital tools. at both individual or and community levels. Element of the new digital culture is democratization of information, collaboration, freedom of expression, space for self-exploration, dialogical reflection of reality. Next, capability. Importance of capability in digital transformation. Digital transformation have church effectively based on capability of members, leader, and administrator. Without adequate capability, church risks losing relevance and effectiveness, hindering progress and survival. Strength the church mission through digital transformation. Koinonia facilitates virtual interaction, prayer, and strengths community ties. Diakonia enables quick response to community needs, is a service program organization, and support food rationing. Marturia.
Hi, Julius. Sorry, we lost you. If you want to get your presentation back up.
Okay. Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, adaptive responsive governance. Governance must be adaptive and responsive to rapid change in the digital environment. Integration of digital humanism. Digital transformation governance should integrate digital humanism, balancing innovation with fairness, inclusivity, and sustainability. Okay, next, organization and coordination. Need for digital transformation requires new adjustments and adjustments in the church organizational design. Church face the challenge of developing a structured approach to digital transformation, as various digital initiatives may not be interconnected. Church must evaluate their organizational structure to ensure it supports digital transformation, making necessary adjustments and ensuring proper coordination. Effective digital transformation depends on organization and coordination. Next, management methodology. Church must adopt management methodology to effectively manage digital transformation and strengthen their mission. Marturia, management methodology help church design strategy to spread the gospel through engaging content. Ensure the church remain in fellowship, supporting one another. Diakonia, management methodology enable church to quickly respond to community needs, organize service program, and fundraise effectively. The application of management methodology in digital transformation help church serve better in changing world. Next, digital platform. A company digital transformation management is built around its digital platform, which includes supporting technology, application, and data. Three interrelated elements of digital platform. Core platform. Support Koinonia by managing member information, activity, and relationship, strength community. Data platform analyze data relate to ministry activity and impact, helping the church understand and respond to the needs of congregation and community, enhancing faith fitness. Church-oriented platform enhance Diakonia by analyzing social and demographic data to design target ministry program for community in needs. Next, partnership network. Digital transformation management involves creating an ecosystem of partners with supporting access, which is essential for success. Church must collaborate in a way with other church or institution to enhance digital transformation efforts. Miller highlighted the close relationship between interactive in digital transformation and partnership networks. But interactive and partnership can complement and increase each other's effectiveness, contributing to innovation and achieving a larger goal. The schematic of the 10 key elements of digital transformation management is as follows. Overview of digital transformation key element. 10 key elements of digital information are categorized into providing orientation, building structure, and creating context. This element align with the three missions of the Church: Koinonia, Diakonia, and Marturia. Sub-illustration picture outline the integration of three aspects of the Church in relation to digital transformation, like this. Ethical consideration and Christian value to digital transformation. Digital transformation must be applied wisely, considering ethical dimension and Christian value. Human service. Digital transformation should strengthen and expand human service, not replace them. Alignment with Christian doctrine. Recommendation from digital transformation management should align with Christian doctrine and values and be regularly evaluated. Track and interactive process. Implementation of digital transformation requires a thoughtful process, including training, evaluation, and refinement. Conclusion. Digital theology as an effective framework, empowerment of Christian community, the need for the theological, ethical, and strategic foundation, roadmap for digital innovation in the church. Digital theology as an effective framework. Digital theology can enhance the church mission, particularly in Koinonia, Diakonia, and Marturia through digital transformation management. Empowerment of Christian community. Digital transformation management empowers Christian community to evangelize, building fellowship, and provide service more effectively and efficiently. The need for theological, ethical, and strategic foundation. Digital innovation must be integrated with a theological, ethical, and strategical foundation to ensure the alliance with spiritual and theological value. Roadmap for digital innovation in the church. This paper, a paper of work around roadmap for creating digital innovation that depend the church impact in increasingly digitalized world, digital era. Okay, thank you for this opportunity.
Brilliant. Virtual round of applause, Julius. Really well done. A lot packed in there. For those of you, you'll have opportunity to read Julius's full paper in reviews, and there is a lot to consider about how we develop a digital approach to being churches in the current society. Has anyone got any questions? If they haven't, oh, Mike, go for it. You first. I'll save mine.
Thank you so much. As Finley says, there was so much in that, and very, very exciting too. It was a thrilling talk to hear. But I wonder, clearly you're right in that your basic premise is right, in that the church needs to engage with the various opportunities that these technologies provide, digital technologies provide. Do you see there as being any downsides to those technologies? Any points where the church needs perhaps to take a prophetic role in saying, no, there are problems with this and these technologies, they need to be resisted?
Okay, thank you for, can you, sorry, can repeat your question like slowly?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course.
Yes,
I think
I'm sorry.
no problem. I think you've given us a really good call for the church to act in this
Yes.
digital domain. But I'm thinking, do you see there to be difficulties, problems with this domain, where the church might need to actually exercise a prophetic role and say, no, we should not be doing this, that, or the other thing? I have some examples, but I'd like to hear what you think of that. Are there points where we need to resist digital technology?
Okay, thank you for the question. Uh, I think the difficult
Perhaps I could give an example. I was reading in a newspaper a couple of days ago that there is a church which has installed an AI confessional so that people can make confessions and be absolved by an AI, an artificial intelligence, with no need for a human being to be involved. Do you think that's a good development or not?
Okay. Many churches, especially more traditional ones, may not have staff trained in digital technology. This can make but limitation. Church which I see the church with limited funds often struggle to invest in the technological infrastructure required for digital transformation, such as hardware, software, and staff training. Culture and tradition challenge, like culture and tradition challenge, church as institution that often hold on traditional can have difficulty in adapting rapid change, like like this, sir, or uh, I have answered the question. Sorry, sir.
I think it's a tricky question anyway, Mike. I think it was a mean question, but
Yeah,
a really
so,
a good question. I think
but there are
it
others
might.
waiting. There are others waiting, I think. So thank you. Thank you.
I'm still bachelor student, sir, and I'm still studying English language, and sorry.
You have done much better
No,
than any of us would have done. So well
no
done. I
problem.
think
Thank
it
you.
might be a good question to perhaps follow up via email when people can both take a bit more
Okay.
time with the
Yes.
question.
Sorry, sir.
Not a problem at all. Flora, I'm aware that we need to move on to, I think it's your presentation now anyway. Would you like to ask your question? We've got time for you to ask your question before we move on to your presentation, or you can put it in the chat, whichever is easier.
Oh no, I'm just saying you might benefit from the media theology stuff, and because they not only discuss like kind of artifacts we can use, but they also evaluate like the mediation effect. So if that's helpful to you, so it's not like a question or criticism or things like that. It's just a humble suggestion.
Sounds like a great suggestion, Flora. I wonder if following your talk, you could put some suggestions in the chat so
Yes,
Julius
yes,
can
okay.
follow up. I think that would
Yes.
be really helpful.
Yeah.
So I think a final round of applause for Julius because he handled that admirably. Really well done, Julius, and even with technical difficulties. So well done, and thank you for sharing.
Okay, so actually I gave a similar talk in China like before, but like the talk was really short, but the Q&A was really long. So I think I'll do a similar thing today. I'll try to limit myself to 10 minutes, and then I would like to hear more questions. If no one asks a question, I'll name Michael to ask 10. So like for years, at least 5 years, I've been thinking, what is attractive about Japan, particularly in our discussion on robots and religion? So I think generally there are three like features. The first one is because of their non-anthropocentric religious traditions. And the second one is because they have fabricated robots in their everyday life. And the final one is like they have a unified and coded cultural perspective of robotics. But then I want to ask the further question. Sorry, just move myself down. So what is the influence of the cultural foundation on people's acceptance of anthropomorphic robots? And to what extent that this cultural foundation is quite unique to Japan? So before I try to answer these two questions, so like I want to first I want to explain how was the association of religion and robots shaped. So basically, There are two ways. One is to integrate robots in religious rituals, and the second one is to use religion in understanding like robots or robotics. You know, for anyone who's doing any research on robotics, he or she must know about that person like Masahiro Mori, because he coined the term the uncanny valley effect. But in fact, he's also a Buddhist practitioner. So he wrote a lot of books on Buddhism and robots. So for the first one, you know, using robots in religious rituals, we have so many examples we just, you know, saw from other people's slides, but I want to name two, like the Hotoke AI. So it's a chatbot based on ChatGPT. So you can use that to get like Buddhist teaching. And another is the robot priest Minda. It's in the Kotaiji in Kyoto. And so what is the Buddha nature of robots according to Mori? So it's the Buddha nature of robots is actually not an entity, but part of the universal thinghood that our body and mind need to adapt to. So it's like if we are driving a car, it's not like we control the car, but it's like our body or our mind adapt to that car. So that's what Mori mean by Buddha nature originally. And so in that sense, the Buddha nature as relation from the East tradition is different from what we say by relation of two individuals, like I and thou, in the Christian tradition. So the first one is refers to cosmic order, and the second one actually more about individual personhood. So the robots in Japan is like regarded as part of the natural world, but not as personhood of non-humans. So the following questions: is the Buddha nature soul-like? In fact, in Buddhism, there's still something called human uniqueness, and that human uniqueness is coined as kokoro, as the heart mind. So in that case, the Buddha nature is actually not the soul-like thing, because the soul-like thing in Buddhism would be kokoro. And another kind of common misunderstanding is like when I say that robots has a Buddha nature, I'm saying that robots has a spirit or things like that, but actually it's not. So it's not Buddhist teaching, but it's animist teaching. The problem is for animism, it does not always guarantee a friendly attitude towards robots, particularly if in the East Asian traditions, if animals can have sort of like spirits, people will respect them, but at the same time, they will feel like they will become fear about them as well. So it's like a common example in the West, you know, the Christmas Carol, and the spirits are not kind of the friendly characters. It can be scary. It can be kind of authoritative. So, and also I want to mention that the West and the East, they have different historical passes of robots. And for the West, the robots is kind of as a metaphor of the slave of mass production. It's not about robots is mechanical, things like that. It's about the mass productions kind of provided kind of like a possibility that to produce something identical with each other. So that's the key metaphor of robots. But like for Japan, the tradition of robots is actually composed by two traditions. One is the traditional Japanese art of automaton, like the ningyo. And the second one is the invasion of the modern technology of the West. Sorry. So therefore, I kind of propose a new direction for a cross-cultural dialogue on religion and robots. And I want to say we should downplay the spiritual side and downplay the projective interpretations of being spiritual, because that can cause misunderstanding between religions. And I also want to say we should focus on more pragmatic perspective, focusing on how to use robots as religious artifacts to promote the public engagement of religion and ethos of religion groups. And so in that case, I was saying like we should focus on the engineering of beliefs in robots. And to resonate with Michael's early question, I do think there are ethical problems, but I think these ethical problems can be addressed through a pragmatic approach in ethics and morality. So we just need to be more careful in evaluating the effects conveyed by these religious robots. So to conclude, what can we learn from the Japanese robots? A is like we get a new metaphor for robots as religious artifacts in religious practice. And like, for example, we both know the case about using ChatGPT in church service by a theologian from the University of Vienna. And also, I want to introduce the Orihim humanoid. It's invented for people with disability, so they can use that robots, they can control that robots to talk with people from like other places and to shape a better human community through the robotic body. But also, I want to say we need to be cautious about the capitalist social order imbued in modern technology. I have to say, these robots are very expensive, even if they can promote social good. Yeah, that's the reference. And also, I attached 2 pictures about the robot prize in Kyoto. So I want to point out, it's actually not just a robot, because you can see it's about the projection. And it's all about the translations, you know, the special effects, stuff like that. So we should view that as a unit with robots, but not just a single like discursive thing of robots. And also that's a Orihim robot I met before. So basically they are operated by people who have like limited mobility. So, but like with that robots, they can control them through the iPad, because, you know, sometimes it's not very nice to, you know, have Zoom meeting with like particularly with people who don't want other people to see themselves, but they also want some like physical presence, and they also want some like bodily movement. So that robots can help them to achieve this goal. And because this robot is movable, so it can like lift its hands, it can like switch the robotic head. So when you're talking to that person, and he can just control the robots to respond to you. And by the way, to claim the fund I received, I was sponsored by Sasakawa Foundation. If you a British scholar, if you need some work to do in Japan, you can apply for it. Yeah. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've got some questions, but I'm gonna be quiet for a minute. I'm gonna say, has anyone else got any questions before I ask some of my questions? Oh no, look, they're all being very well behaved. I'm gonna ask some of my questions. So yeah, I suppose what I was wondering about is I remember watching a video of Maury talking about using robotics to understand human creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually it was, like you say, in that uncanny valley, we realize what it is that is unique about humanity. Do you think there's a place for robotics or AI in helping us understand what it means for something to be spiritual or to be religious by identifying that uncanny in the same way?
First, I don't think so. Because the uncanny valley thing for me, it's just so complicated, because A, it's really about the art style. The art style of robots affect the uncanny feeling. And B, is also about human cognition. So for now, I can't guarantee, or I don't think other like scientists, they can guarantee about kind of solving the problem of the uncanny. And C, based on some practical understanding, like the experiments, particularly from Hiroshi Ishiguro from Japan, that uncanny thing only lasts kind of like 2 seconds. So I would say it's really, you know, it's too early to think of questions like that. That's why I want to encourage theologians, like, let's just downplay anything related to like spiritual or spirituality stuff for now, because still like a new thing. Do you see what I mean? Because maybe we have something to say this year, and next year some scientific experiments like devalue them. So, you know, so yeah. Sorry, Finn.
No, it's That's why I asked the question. Has anyone else got any? Mike, go for it.
Thank you, Mike.
Hello, Flora. Great to see you again. Hi.
you.
Can I just push you on the a little on that sort of limit question that I was raising with our last speaker? Clearly, I mean, what you've been outlining is it's wonderful stuff. It's really, really interesting. It's going to shape how we develop in so many ways in the future. But do you think there are particular aspects of human experience, religious experience, that we simply can't devolve to robots? I mean, in the Christian tradition, you know, I mentioned this idea of a robot hearing confession and pronouncing absolution. I think there are many Christians who might have difficulties with that sort of idea. Do you think there are limitations to what we can properly ask of robots in this sort of context?
Yes, I'm actually willing to answer these questions now, because I kind of mentioned that in other pieces of work. But anyway, so like a brief answers from myself. I do think this religious robot thing kind of trivialize religious experience. And sometimes you just feel overwhelming and people say, no, that's religious experience. But that's actually not, you know, as a people who don't believe in religion, when they go into a hole of like the cathedral and they're like, oh, that's so overwhelming, you know, and they may think that's religious experience, but I doubt that. And B, I think sort of like the kind of the uniqueness about the religious experience, particularly for insiders, I do think there are so many of them existed. But like for examples, I think it's really important to have that embodied kind of connection, the embodied interactions with people. So that's why I think the Orihim robots is just a good kind of solution when people can't, you know, because they can't leave their bed maybe, so they really can't have embodied interaction. So it's just a good solution for that, but it's not an ideal situation. And also, I think kind of like the critical problem to your question, Michael, I think it's about differentiate different religious experience, but like it's a theologian's task. Do you see what I mean? Like to kind of to differentiate what is the overwhelming experience and what is the religious experience, like the encounter with holy, what is the kind of the different experience when you hear a call from God, like that's all about the phenomenological work. But let's wait for my other works.
Thanks very much, Flora. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Paul,
Hi.
have you got a question? Go for it.
Yes, I have. From where is the robot's authority derived, and who has responsibility for it?
I think still the church, because it is the church's responsibility to evaluate the effect that conveyed in the robot artifact. And because I don't know if you see the news about the robot priest in Kyoto in Japan, it's actually encouraged by their like church, not church, like temple leader, if you see what I mean, their religious leaders. And because they think it's a good way to kind of to attract more people and to better teach the doctrine of the emptiness to more people, like particularly from like other countries other than Japan, you know. But it's just because of their evaluation. Do you see what I mean? So it's there's no like absolute right or wrong about that. And it's also about their evaluation of the practical effects in kind of attracting more people or like better teaching the Buddhist kind of the doctrine or things like that.
I do remember somebody coming to my church in Felixstowe many years ago when we were talking at organs, but they had a machine. We don't light candles, in a sense, as an act of devotion, specifically Methodism. I'm a Methodist minister, in quite the same way, but as a Catholic church might, or high Anglican one. But he was offering us a machine by which people could put coins in it, and it would light a bulb for a short time instead of lighting a candle. And he said that was quicker and cheaper and more efficient. And we sort of didn't think that people would necessarily want to put 10 pence in to light a bulb for 30 seconds. And it wouldn't be the same as devotionally lighting a candle. Maybe it would if you invested the prayer in the action, but it did seem a trivialization.
I actually don't know. Because the thing is, I think it's really depends on personal preference from my perspective. I mean, things I understand the significance of this like sacramental meaning, religious performance. I do understand. But the thing is, do people who do that understand? Or do they care about that? So I think it's I mean, when I say the responsibility belongs to the church, I would say it's I'm not saying the church need to guarantee something. I just say that it's you know, the church has an interest conflict, if you see what I mean. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's really about when to what extent people think that religious thing can be replaced by technology or can be replaced by like robots. But I'm quite optimistic about that, because I think the robot is too expensive. Even in the case of Japan, people don't hire robots in the Buddhist performance now, even if they have so many like robots who can do that. It's because it's expensive. But they do use like cleaning robots, because that cleaning work should be done by human, but now they use robots. But they put something on the robots to say the spirit is with the robots. That's why the robots can be used to clean the religious set. But it's really about kind of when or to what extent a mutual agreement has reached. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a really good question as well, about how comfortable other people are with that move from digital, from analog to digital as well. I think that's really interesting. I know particularly the Methodist Church having conversations around communion at a distance. So I think there's a lot of really interesting conversations there. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm just going to hand over to Luca for our final question.
Thank you, Flora. I really like the presentation. I wonder whether, you know, given the sacraments in the church have a material aspect, like the baptism, the Eucharist, which is material, has an impact compared with other religions, say Buddhism, because I think it's okay to use this technology, say, to discuss a biblical text, go through the biblical text, but then when it's something material, like, you know, the Eucharist or the you know, something that is touching with the hand, whether that is the like separation from that we should put a limit on technology, on the AI technology. That's my impression. I don't know if Buddhism, I don't know how much in Buddhism materiality is emphasized.
I mean, because I like my main focus is still Christian theology, so I totally agree with you about the, you know, the materiality, the Eucharist stuff. But I in the Japan context, or particularly the Buddhist context, actually to use robots is it's like has no conflict with their emphasis on materiality. I mentioned that in the essay, but I didn't mention that in the presentation. But the thing is, based on so the rationality of having this robot priest in Japan is because there's a doctrine in Buddhism, you know, the Trikaya stuff. And one of the Trikaya is the Manakaya. So basically it's the body, a temporal body that you used to teach the Buddhist doctrines. So in that case, the robot priest perfectly fits with that purpose, if you see what I mean. So if you say it's just a temporal body, and to teach people the Buddhist teaching, the Buddhist doctrine, and that's it. So that's why I say we really need to focus on the material practice or the practical side, because if we just ask questions like that, it's just easy to to lost in translation. So yeah, I hope I answer your question. Yeah, but so in a word, so it might seem to be weird in the Christian tradition, but it might have some rationality in terms of other religion, but like with the particular interpretation of a particular doctrine. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to preface, I'm at work, working in a school, so if someone comes in the background, please try to ignore them. Or if like an alarm goes off that sounds like an air raid, it's actually just the end of a lesson. There's not a fire. But yeah, so I'm talking about this embodiment in biology, and it's really like an overlooked issue. And I think, Andrew, you're kind of looking at it last, even though I only got to join towards the end. And this kind of like old ontological physicalism, which has kind of been left behind. And I guess I want to start with asking a question about how maybe we experience life. And so I don't know about you, but maybe you experienced life like if I leant back here and I was in a dentist chair and I had loads of, I was frozen in time with loads of laser points shone through me and like a bunch of invisible atoms started showing up. Is that how we all experience life? Well, me neither. I hope you answered no to that, because I'd be a bit worried if you said yes, because this is just not how we experience life. And as it turns out, it's not how any biological molecules exist in context either. And so this has become a massive problem for biologists, because historically, we have this structural school of molecular biology, and they use this kind of method. I've got a couple of images here of what is called X-ray crystallography. And in this kind of method, the biological molecules are observed and described structurally. And this kind of information, which we can glean here just from like dots of refracted lasers, we can derive some kind of molecular structure from them. And whilst this kind of method of crystallography led to immense discovery, it can only actually be successfully enacted if we freeze molecules. They're completely solidified. And therefore, crystallized molecules, which are observed in crystallography, really only represent this kind of snapshot of an incapacitated protein frozen in time. Okay, and so on the right, we've got an image here, what we can recognize to be DNA. But as time progressed and new approaches and technology emerged, the inaccuracy of this kind of previous method and understandings which emerged from that became apparent, because it quite clearly from life and experience itself, proteins are not crystalline at all. Rather, they're dense liquids which appear rather more like melted solids. And so like the emergence of dynamic processes for observing proteins, so leaving behind this crystallography, such as ones like nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, I cannot pronounce that word, revealed proteins as in perpetual movement. Okay, so now there's a shift. We're not seeing proteins frozen in time anymore in molecular biology. We're actually seeing them in perpetual movement. And now proteins can be observed in process. And so we know that proteins are plastic and dynamic. And this kind of this inherent nature of the protein reveals itself. And so we can kind of derive some kind of conclusions from this. And then it shows really not just biologically, but maybe philosophically speaking, the only faithful account we can offer up of the protein then is one that considers time alongside the object's place in its environment. Because we have to view the protein in movement. We can no longer freeze it in time, because that would we know that to be false. Okay, so this dynamic understanding of life, or of biology rather, must stretch the organism also. And then this viewing things in the history and in time and in place and environment also affects how we speak of the embodied process of life, and then subsequently the work of the biologist, because the biologist is within life itself. So by taking history, position and context into account within their studies, it becomes apparent that the biologist's account is tinged by this observation, which is made by Merleau-Ponty, and I quote, "What we call life is already consciousness of life." And this kind of fact resists the reductionist account of molecular biology. That's something I'm going to talk about more in a moment. And so what it turns out to be is that this idea we cannot encapsulate biological concepts which underlie life in these kind of Lego-like structures. Rather, going back to Merleau-Ponty, we need to follow his call for an accurate description of lived experience for a narrative of lived space. This is quote, lived space, lived time, and a lived world. And so this view really centralizes the reality of life and the experience we have, things in dynamic and plastic motion. And this reality of life only offers this most faithful account of how we experience it. And so going back to the biologist itself and this whole idea, the paper I submitted, idea of embodiment and the biologist, all biological concepts tacitly contain this residual effect of life, therefore. They are inescapably rooted in the embodiment of the biologist. As a result, these concepts rely on life and can only emerge as a symptom of life and its presence. And so this notion is articulated well by French historian of science, Georges Canguilhem, and he uses the example of the reflex. And so Canguilhem, what he argued is, like all concepts and precepts themselves, the reflex exists in a feedback loop. And so the concept is initially distilled from perception, from life, observation, and this derives an understanding which is still incomplete. So we have this initial distillation. Then the concept is fed back into our perception again. So now I'm seeing the concept in the world, I've distilled it, and now I'm projected back out again. And this transforms it in a dialectical manner. Therefore, when this perception is reconstituted, so into the self, it is alongside an assimilated concept, a full-bodied concept, which is re-emerged because of this dialectical nature of concepts, or what he calls the life of concepts. Okay, so here we see this. I'll get onto this diagram of the duck in a moment. We can see this already in the influence of life on biological concepts. And so Canguilhem, going back to the reflex, fiercely criticizes the presumed mechanistic conception of the reflex. Because, and I quote, this lacks an authentic biological comprehension of the organism. So to understand the reflex comprehensively, we must actually look at the role of history and the development of science and the concepts and the life of concepts more generally. So this effect of it being embodied, the process and this feedback loop and dialectical nature of distillations. So to rectify this misnomer of the history of the reflex, Canguilhem turns back to the origins, and he notes this scholarship's frequent misattribution of the conception of the reflex to René Descartes and his machine view of the organism. And so here's an artistic rendition of what this may look like on the left-hand side. So here, this is clearly what a duck is, and if you chop the duck in half, that's what it would look like on the inside. And so Descartes actually was never able to formulate a true concept of the reflex, because for Canguilhem, he lacked this bridge between the phenomena and the definition. And so what he did was offer no explanatory sentence that captured what he called the sense of the phenomenon. And so to complete this historical survey, Canguilhem traced the first completion of the reflex to Thomas Willis, the British natural philosopher. And then here, there's a quote from Willis on the right-hand side. And so Willis is quoted to have described the irresistible motion that results from irritation. And the reason he was able to formulate this complete concept of the reflex is because he syncretized biology with optics. So he compared the reflex to reflection of light. And so in doing so, and if you look at Willis's notion of life more generally as light, Willis attunes his concept to life itself, his concept of the reflex. And so it's really a difference in analogy between Descartes and Thomas Willis that separated this ability to formulate this idea of the reflex or not. So in other words, it was Descartes' refusal to operate under an ontology of life, preferring the machine, that prevented him from completing this concept of the reflex. Because as we can see, the reflex is an abstraction from life. It's something derived from experience, something prior to scientific rationalization. So life precedes the perception And the success of Willis's ontology of life implicates Canguilhem's conclusion that, and I quote, the thought of the living must take from the living the idea of the living. And so for biology to succeed then, it must explicitly participate in the living. This reflects Merleau-Ponty's observation, and I quote from the beginning, what we call life is already consciousness of life. And yet it is Merleau-Ponty's ontology that tackles what it means to be within the world, to be in light, embodied. And he pursues a phenomenology, something that, according to him, places the essence back into existence. And so to achieve this for Merleau-Ponty, we need to bracket our inhabiting of the world. So we do the eidetic reduction. We undergo a reduction towards the things themselves, to the objects prior to scientific investigation. So this meant placing the body in a central role for Merleau-Ponty, because the body is a mediator between the thought and the thing itself. An inherent coexistence, therefore, emerges between the body and the world. And so this makes life inseparable, and this is a quote, inseparable from this particular body and from this particular world. So, as it was for Canguilhem, we now live in a perpetual two-way street, cars going both ways, okay? Because the world has formed the communion, Merleau-Ponty's concept, where according to Merleau-Ponty, and I quote, the sensible gives back to me what I'd lent to it, but I received from it the sensible in the first place. And so, and it's quote on the screen, the inescapability of the body in the world forces the biologists to reach beyond the self in their scientific investigations. And therefore, they internally carry their context with them. They have this baggage on their back forever. This renders the biologists continuously prejudiced by their habits and sedimentations, irrecoverably altering their perceptions. So the biologist experiences the world in a similar way to the mountain climber. So you can imagine the mountain climber, myself and Andrew. Andrew's a mountain climber, and we both come to this rock face here. He can see that the rock face is alive because of this, these habits, this experience, this historicity he brings with him. Whereas to me, I come to the rock face, it's dead. I'm not climbing up that. I'm going around on the rambling route on the right-hand side instead. And so it's this fertility, which is owed to the biologist's history of experience, sedimentations of habits, and tacit knowing, which results in the climber receiving, or the biologist in this case, receiving their unique signification.
Two more minutes, Kieran.
Yeah, sorry. So this includes the biologist in this phenomenology. And so their experience, habits, and tacit metaphysical beliefs are included in this phenomenology. So as I outlined X-ray crystallography in introduction, and it's a observation for protein structures, this applies then. So the sedimentation of the microscopic experiences of crystallography coalesces into habit for the biologist. And so this affects their tacit knowing. So unaware of the effects of this habit, the biologist dwells within the idea of crystallography, being made up of it. So dwelling within crystalline proteins, these habits enter the feedback loop of concepts with the biologist, generating an attitude of life as frozen within time. And so crystallography and its metaphysical ramifications made atemporally frozen molecules the ontological norm, habitualizing this way of seeing life as frozen. So seen through a Merleau-Pontian framework, the biologist assimilated this habit into the perceptual field, altering their interaction with the world. So the biologist's prejudiced perceptual field installs an inherent subjective tinge to science. And so this is where this Merleau-Ponty quote comes in. Everything that I know about the world, even through science, I know from a perspective that is my own, or from an experience of the world. The entire universe is constructed upon the lived world, i.e. the world is experienced. And so therefore, in cases of underdetermined scientific data, mechanistically oriented scientists are prejudiced to choose the theory that has feature, let's call M, friendliest towards mechanistic ontologies. And so we can see this switch in Merleau-Ponty's work when he looks at quantum mechanics. And so he says this: the scientist of today, unlike his predecessor working within the classical paradigm, no longer cherishes the illusion that he's penetrating to the heart of things, to the object in itself. We can no longer flatter ourselves with the idea that science exercises a pure and unsituated intellect that can allow us to gain access to the object free of all human traces. So I'll finish here. So ultimately, this embodiment inescapably invokes alterations on the encountering with the world, rendering any claim for an unsituated biology, abstract from life, as false. So this worldly situation embodied by the biologist calls into question the scientific objectivism often claimed. Therefore, a new relationship between science and religion emerges, one without scientific primacy, owed to a new phenomenological look of biology which has been unearthed. So therefore, questions such as, must an epistemological re-ranking of knowledge be undertaken between the sciences and theology need answering? And I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kieran, for giving us a treat into a very different kind of philosophy compared to what we've had earlier, more continental phenomenology. So that's wonderful. And we have time, just 4 minutes for some very quick questions, if anyone has any. I think Paul has his hand up. Paul, go ahead.
Hello. You remind me very much of the controversy when I was an undergraduate, which is a long, long time ago, about electron microscopy, which is the same issue, isn't it? And the cell membrane theory, Daniel N. Davison, and protein mosaic, that when you put cell membranes under an electron microscope, you've got this nice structure with the proteins on, proteins on the outside, phospholipids inside, but they didn't behave that way at all. So the pharmacologist was saying it isn't like that. And but the pictures look like that. But of course, in electron microscopy, you're not actually looking at the object, you're looking at a metal mold of the object. So that you've got this process that changes it. I suppose all science it's all an analogy, isn't it? Would you agree?
Yeah, and then you get this difference between like the ontological physicalism, which is often claimed, and then this then leads into like a sort of narrative of science religion as theology, philosophy, very far down the pecking order. And you see this through everything. I was doing philosophy in The Simpsons with one of my year 10s. I teach already. And even in The Simpsons, it's talking, there's a court case at the end, and it goes, the judge goes, I sentence religion to stay 200 meters away from science at all times, or something like that. But it's not true, because they're really, this is because of this kind of narrative that maybe science is getting to the heart of things when it's really not, because we're not appreciating this kind of veil that we're going through and this dialectical nature we have of the world. And so this could be expanded further, as what Andrew was talking about with the extended evolutionary synthesis, something like that, where there is like this two-way street between the organism and the world, this niche construction kind of thing. And then the kind of thing I'm looking at the moment, like this ontology of flesh, which is Merleau-Ponty further, where he's kind of saying, well, actually the problem is a vocabulary problem. We just don't have the words to express what's going on. And that's where maybe the biologists aren't appreciating this effect of life, because they're just, the vocabulary isn't there. So it's easier just to kind of feign this kind of ignorance, like pretend it's not there kind of thing. And I think maybe that's the issue, and that's what could be rectified here.
The best analogy I heard recently was that between, you do a technical drawing of a plant, which I used to teach, and it's a technical drawing, although you're still interpreting and it's still your skill. Then you've got botanical illustration, which is a little more interpreted. And then you've got botanical art, which is this marvelous thing where people are anatomically correct but beautiful paintings. And then you get Monet and water lilies, and which one is the truth? They're all interpretations. They all involve the interpreter, and they all, in a sense, are as true as each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is this idea where I talk about habit and bringing in prejudice almost, because then there's Nina Emery, this philosopher of this metaphysician, philosopher of science, and she has this idea of underdetermination, and then this is when extra empirical principles come in practice. And so what I was kind of trying to argue is that maybe this, what is called like the MCO, so this machine conception of the organism, is kind of this extra empirical that principle people are biased by. And so say you just prefer this view, almost, you just see the world through it. It's become an extra empirical principle. And so it comes back to what Thomas Kuhn says, where people can see all the same data and operate completely under the same paradigms, but still come to completely different conclusions at the end because of maybe some sort of excellent empirical principle like this.